Ladies and gentlemen of the crypto space, we're live on a Friday, December 12th at 11:30 a.m. in the morning on the East Coast. Sunny out. I think I'm going to have to catch some sun in a little bit. So, we didn't have a stream earlier this week because there was not much to talk about. The truth is, there's always something to talk about. The problem is, folks don't necessarily want to hear it. What does that mean? The truth. The truth is staring us all right in the face. And it's obvious, it's blatant. The system is broken. Everyone knows it, but they don't recognize it. What does that mean? Where's this thought coming from? And a lot of what I do, and a lot of the way I think, is trying to consolidate or compress everything I think about, all the ideas, into a reduced, a minimized, a consolidated concept. So the train of thought that came to me this morning was it's all the same thing. You're investing in crypto, your sentiment regarding news media, your sentiment regarding politics, your sentiment regarding your paycheck or your bank account balance, it's all the same phenomena. It's all related. And what is the relationship? The relationship is it's not disappointment. It's entirely being fed up is a phrase, or at the end of a rope is another phrase. That's a bad phrase. It has a connotation that's probably not the best connotation. But people should be done with the system the way it is. And this is maybe something that Bitcoiners express very well. Fix money, fix the system. But the problem is that's too utopian. That's not going to happen. The system persists, it continues. So whereas I agree with that Bitcoin narrative, I'm more of a realist. And that's why I look to crypto rather than just Bitcoin. Because the realistic person in me says that the crypto will be exploited, will be consumed because it is more consistent with and integratable with the status quo system to such a degree that the status quo system will consume it and use it to further perpetuate its own continued existence. So, what is broken? Clearly, money is broken. Clearly, politics is broken. Clearly, what is investable is broken. Clearly, you can always come back to the paycheck is broken compared to prices, but that boils down to politics because the politicians have broken that part of the system. You understand that, right? Because they continue to spend and prevent deflation. It stares everyone in the face, but the vast majority will never understand it. Deflation, or the collapse of business and unemployment, brings down prices because if people can't afford to buy things, the prices of goods and services comes down. So by preventing the collapse of business, preventing bankruptcies, preventing unemployment, prevents the prices from coming down. I don't know if people realize that's as simple as it is because everyone's looking out for their own self-interest. Oh, they don't want to be unemployed, but it's not natural what's occurring. It's not natural for businesses to continue to exist that fucking suck. What is a business that fucking sucks? A business that's not profitable, a business that has more debt that its income cannot service well. It means it has a shit balance sheet, often called a zombie company, which is like the vast majority of the Russell 2000 are zombie companies, or this just the pricing, price to earnings, how these stocks for equities are priced compared to their earnings and the multiples that exist. How perverted is that? You would think that the value of a stock is a manifestation of the value of the company, not multiples the value of the company or multiples the earnings of the company. What kind of bullshit is that? How are you supposed to value it? Oh, I feel it's 10 times. It should be valued 10 times how much it makes. What kind of stupid shit is that? And then it's like, oh, the comps. Oh, it's a real estate phrase. You go by the comps. Well, on average, tech is what? 20, 20x price to earning? What kind of stupid shit is that? Well, it's the average, the consensus is what people think the price of a stock should be based on its earnings and how many multiples. What kind of stupid investment thesis is that? But that is also the status quo. So when looking at equities, those are the types of things you look at to determine investable characteristics, but that's stupid. So as much as I could appreciate how to perform that activity, how to contemplate investing in equities, I also simultaneously recognize how stupid it is, how broken it is. And therefore I choose different types of investments, investments that have become relatively distasteful right now in the general public, the crypto space. Because if the crypto population, the persons that do entertain these types of investments, are fleeing left and right and getting liquidated for hundreds of millions of dollars to the downside and the upside left and right, if they're no longer enchanted with these investments, there's only one conclusion to make. They're wrong and they don't understand why they do what they do, what they're really investing in. So let me try and tie together two other threads. I try and shy away from politics as much as possible because of how polar it gets left and right. But rather, and the way I like to talk about politics is to remind folks that the concept of left and right are wrong. Uh, the system has and always has been the people versus the government. The problem is humans love to join groups, and it's always polar. Team A, Team B. Why are team sports uh, one versus the other? Uh, Everything, one team versus another. Even tennis, where it's a single person, it's one person versus another. It's always one versus another. There's very few governments around the world that have a truly spread out multi-party system. But even if it is, you still have the concentration amongst two: left, right, up, down. Everything in reality, in human reality, is very polar, even physics, negative and positive. So, what's the only conclusion that could possibly be made? It's all fucking wrong. It's us versus the government. That's the polar relationship. People are angry at the Republicans for saying about the insurance situation. And on one hand, you have the Democrats saying that the Republicans are making people pay more in insurance. And I'm like, why the fuck are people paying for other people's insurance? It's a very simple statement. So that's how we consolidate and look, zoom out on that entire situation and realize they're both idiots, because the story isn't about Republicans saying, I don't want to pay for other people's insurance, or Democrats saying, I want to pay for other people's insurance. It's the fact that the government has no business doing any of that. So it's the people versus the government. So it comes back to simply taxation. And they have too much money. They take too much of people's money. So they're like, what could I do with their money? And that is broken. So what could you do about that reality, that the entire situation is broken and they will take 30 to 50% of your money in the United States? And you can always say that internationally they'll take more, what, 60, 70% in some places in Europe. But your reality is where you live, and the reality is in the United States, 30 to 50% of your money is a whole lot of your money because you spend your time working, and that's just an absolute stupid thing that actually is real. It's horrible. So we've discussed structures, business structures, accounting. I don't handle offshoring. I don't do offshoring because that's increasingly complicated. And I was my conclusion that things can be optimized onshore. And frankly, the things that I talk about onshore are really not discussed by the offshore professionals because the things that I've done onshore are quite technical with regard to trust structuring and whatnot. Very few people have done the amount of work that I've done. Spent years doing this legal research and documentation that I've written. So the whole point is, um, you must do, and the whole point is the title of the stream. Let me remind folks of the title of the stream today. Everything changes from here because you've learned how to do things differently and you're ready. So we've learned over the last years how to do accounting differently and how to think about receipts differently and how to think about property differently. Now, I've talked about these things and I say we've learned because I would hope people have really taken what I've said and changed their lives. That's the only thing I could possibly hope for. What's the point of me talking to you guys if I can't influence at least a couple of people to do something radically different in their life? That's why I've taught. That's why I've shared those thoughts, and I've gone quite deep, especially on Discord. I have my all my memorandums posted. I even share my 8275 disclosure form and some subsections of my 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 primary trust instrument. It's an 83-page document. I don't post the whole thing because a lot of it is personal, but there's some sections like section 20 and 24 are absolutely critical, and I share those. And share other things as most reasonable, or as reasonable as possible, without divulging too much personal information. But that's critical. And we've discussed those things that hopefully can change people's lives because once you figure out how to attempt, or at least attempt to protect your capital from the 30 to 50% theft that federal and state government does, then you could figure out how to acquire more capital with capital allocation. And now obviously I'm skirting around the realities of balancing your budget and how do you acquire capital to buy things and invest in things, and that's unfortunately the simplest part of the equation. And that's because the vast majority of society fucks that up and they live beyond their means. There's y- now honestly a true statement is look how many folks, legal or illegal, and I know from personal experience. I worked at a pizza shop for the better part of 3 years when I finished college, and a large part of the workforce was illegal, and I know how they lived, and I have heard stories from friends and family who own real estate and how folks live, meaning not in a bad way. They live, and this isn't necessarily the manipulators or the grifters. We're talking about folks that work and legitimately do send remittances home, which is it's not. At least there's some honor in that. It's not grifting. It's just taking advantage of the system. But they live three, four, five people in a two-bedroom apartment, and they split up the apartments, and it's a very, very tight living quarters. But they're living below their means for a purpose to send money home. So I don't want to digress too much on the simplest part of the equation, which is don't spend more money than you make, because that just comes down to humbleness. And folks complain about rent. All right, so are you living three families? So you have a $3,000 a month rental. All right, get two people to move in with you and split it three ways, and you just took $3,000 down to $1,000. Oh, it's going to be awkward. Yeah, right. It's going to be fucking awkward. That's exactly what Charlie Munger said. Charlie Munger said your first $100,000 is the hardest. But the point is, if you have $3,000 a month rent and you take on two roommates in a two-bedroom apartment, and fine, it's going to be fucking awkward, but you just freed up $2,000 a month. That's $24,000 a year that you just freed up that you were going to spend on rent that you know I'm going to spend on rent, and you're about to Charlie Munger that shit. Or dare we say that the family situation in this country is not broken. I mean, obviously it is broken. You got kids that move out when they're 18 and young in their 20s and they fuck everything up because unfortunately it all starts with parents. And I do have a capacity to speak on the subject, being a parent. And you optimally you don't leave home. You stay at home as long as possible. And for my children, they are not allowed to leave home until they're 30. And they are required, and I'll say this until they're 30, they're required to pass a financial exam of my own creation before they're allowed to move out. They need to know what they're doing. Otherwise, they're going to fuck everything up. I spent all this time and effort building something, not just for me, primarily for my children, and that's exactly what a trust structure is for. And I will spend every effort and exert every potential possibility I can so they don't fuck it up. And that doesn't mean they're getting money. That doesn't mean I'm leaving a trust, doesn't mean they're leaving them money. What I'm leaving them is an education and knowledge and a capacity to manage, navigate this bullshit system that has been presented to us as our way of life. So you have to understand the way the system works. You have to understand the rules, regulations, and the concept of investing, the concept of capital management. And that leads us to obviously our crypto conversations and everything that I said earlier about equities and how silly price to earnings are and how stupid that investment landscape is. It pushes us towards thinking about things differently, thinking about crypto differently. And that's the primary conversation that we have. Crypto isn't what people think it is. Certainly isn't what people think it is. Crypto, in some regards, is the Bitcoin narrative. You're investing in it because everything else is broken, and this is better. What is better? Because people will say better in crypto, and they'll say fix money, fix the world. But what fixes it? And I tell you what fixes it. That's where I'm different than the vast majority of social media folks. Why is it better? For a very simple reason: immutability and determinism. Two very simple concepts. And when I saw these things, I didn't fully have the mentality and comprehension that I do now. But the reality is, those simple words mean everything, change everything. Because the problem is and always was the uncertainty and risk associated with the human. So we are humans, so we have to deal with and respect that fact, but we will make things better the more deterministic things are and can be, because that reduces uncertainty and that reduces risk. So deterministic, immutable contracts changes everything. It's the best investment there possibly can be because it removes the broken part of the equation, the human, in human resources. There is absolutely no reason, if you're getting a loan from a bank, there's no reason to deal with people. It's all math, it's all equations. There's no sentiment, there's no room for, oh, my opinion is, or my thought of you is, or my. There's no room for that. It's a fucking equation. It's even more so in insurance, actuaries and whatever. They're literally executing an equation. So what does a person, what does a human being have to do with it? Cut the salary. Cut them all. Cut them all. Go do something else. figure something else out. And this will obviously, in my opinion, over time, force people to be employed in increasingly productive roles that in services and forms of labor that are more needed as compared to not needed. You have a more efficient and productive society by getting people out of roles that are not needed, that could be replaced with software. In 2025, it's taken all this time to get to the AI narrative that we could finally start significantly replacing large percentages of people in the workforce and force them to figure out how to do something different. And I personally don't have a problem with forcing people to change because I don't fear change. I know a lot of people do, and that brings up tough questions like people. The vast majority of this country obviously is over their ski tips. They're underwater. They owe on a mortgage. They owe on car loans. There's this dude on YouTube called Yusuf, and he does car loans, and he just broadcasts the conversations with the people dealing with the most egregious car loans that I've ever seen in my entire life. Just like 20% interest, 25% interest, and $100,000 loan. Oh my God. I don't even want to try and find it. Yusuf loans or Yusuf sells or something like that. But it's absolutely astounding what people do to themselves. Now, the reality is people do it to themselves, and they don't have someone like me or a family or a parent to tell them, don't do this to yourself. Don't destroy yourself financially. Instead, do things better, do things strategically, do things with intelligence, learn. Dare I say, use AI nowadays, which has been around for probably 2 and change years. Use it to educate yourself. Be an autodidact, which is learn by yourself for yourself. You don't need someone to teach you anything. You could teach yourself. And that is ultimately the conversation I hope comes across to everyone that listens to me. I'm not necessarily teaching, I'm telling you guys how to teach yourself. And I give you guys some tools. I give you guys the things that I've done on Discord with my business structure. I give you guys my interpretation of what is a good versus a bad investment. I give you guys my interpretation of what is this crypto space that we talk about. And that's why I give you guys the rules, the 4 rules, the 5 businesses of crypto. And then everyone has to choose their portfolio. That's why I don't come on stream and just talk about what do I own, why am I buying, what I'm buying. We've had enough of that with BitBoy and other shitty YouTubers that have destroyed people's lives. It's not for me to tell people what to buy. It's for me to tell people what are good rules. Good rules, not just in crypto, but how to live, how to think differently. Because the system is broken. And the first thing you need to know is why and how the system is broken, and then you could create rules to navigate that broken system. That's the whole point. The whole point is those rules tell us that these crypto protocols that we own are extraordinary, and that's irrespective of price. And that leads us to where we are today, looking at probably what everyone thinks is a bear market. And to me, I see this fractal of sorts. There's a fractal, or at least there's a repetitive pattern. Back in 20, this is actually interesting. I don't think anyone has talked about this very straightforward observation. 100 SMA on the weekly on Bitcoin. So now we get do a little technicals. Is quite inclined compared to what it was in 22. Significantly more inclined. You could look at the slope. So we had a mean regression to the 50 SMA. That was our first dip back in 21. Then our second dip at the end of 21 broke through that 50 SMA. And then we had our interaction with the 100 SMA, which break down. So here, our second dip did not break through the 50 SMA. So we had a third run between in 2024 into 2025. So we had a third run on Bitcoin. One, regress, 2, regress, 3, regress. And that third regression broke the 50 SMA to the downside, excuse me, finding the 100 SMA as support. Here we had 1 regress, 2 regress. I mean, maybe if you just want to get eager with technicals, you could say maybe there's your your second regression. So there was 3 regressions to the 50 SMA back then as well. Clearly more compressed. And then we could do something like this. And there's your third regression. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And there's your 100 SMA mean regression. Now the difference is whether this 100 SMA holds or not. And based on the macro setup, what were we doing back in when it broke down to the 100 SMA, which started really in January of 22? January of 22 is where the Fed was starting to raise rates and drain liquidity from the system. So obviously in April, those policies, those monetary policies started to kick in and liquidity was drained, giving us an entire 200 SMA on the weekly mean regression. And you had an overshoot. So you had an aberration to the downside, a deviation. Um, there's about a 200 SMA mean regression, in my opinion, and observation. The difference is here in December of 25, we're heading into 26, and they're not draining liquidity. It's literally QT ended. They're not doing full on QE, but they're going to do some yield curve modulation because there's $9 trillion that needs to be printed next year out of Treasury. So it's going to be interesting. It's the exact opposite of what it was in January of 22 compared to January of 26. So the cycle isn't what people think it is. People are wrong. And when I see this, I'm like, oh, people are wrong. Yeah, that makes sense because everyone's always wrong. The people are always wrong. The general public is always wrong. So we make an inspection, identifying how and why they're wrong. So we're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So that gives us our opportunity. Opportunity where? In a deterministic and immutable business environment, one that makes equities look stupid. So we're in the right market at the right time, and everyone's wrong. So when I see this, I'm like comfortable and happy and content because it's nice to be right. And it's the most important thing you could do in your life to be right and to know you're right when everyone else is objectively um, and verifiably wrong. This is not a liquidity contracting environment. This is a liquidity expanding environment. So we should expect what occurred here in April of 22 to not be what occurs here in April of 26. It's the opposite type of liquidity environment. Hope that helps. I hope my introduction wasn't too politically leaning or politically charged. But the only way to be able to allocate capital to decent investments, crypto investments in this instance, is to not fuck up the budget, spend less than you make. So I covered that. And then if you manage to make money in crypto, uh, the government in the United States wants to take 30 to 50% of it. So you probably want to think about accounting and how to optimize that. So we covered that. So we covered that also everyone's wrong with regard to politics because it's not people versus people who has the better policies. That is the most idiotic thing I can imagine. It's just the policy at all. The government has no business in any of this. They are the problem. And it was and always will be the government versus the people. Now, unfortunately, that also is your favorite politician on whatever side you vote. Doesn't matter. I have politicians that I like on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, but it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. They're the problem. You don't need them. It's not for the majority. It's not for people. It's not for Anyway, whatever. It's not for money to be redistributed to where it's needed. It's for people to realize how to redistribute money to themselves by expanding their capacity, productivity, their tool sets, to teach themselves how to be different, to teach themselves how to be better and do something new, to have different skills. And that's how people get ahead, not because of government handouts that steal from one and give to another, because that ends up being perverted, like what's going on in Minnesota and how broken that is. Buenos dias, Capitan. Happy to be able to be here to see you live. It's been a long time. Always a pleasure, Scorpius. Much a pleasure. Sergio, President of Cat 4, Gazika, greetings, Cap. I am Dean's in the house. What I've observed is the retail crypto Twitter wants bull market to exist. Wants bull market to exit, own no assets. Yeah, they're broken. That's a broken mentality. They're just, it's just wrong. Period. Yeah, TradFi are adopting the tech, extending time horizon, and we'll do just fine. Yeah, but that's why the rules exist. That's why my rules, whatever, anytime, own more assets. There's nothing else you can do because if the vast majority of wealthy people are wealthy because they own assets, the logic is very simple: own more assets, and you will be increasingly wealthy into the future. Because all the government welfare people complain, and those particular politicians that talk about how the wealthy own 99% of assets. Okay, buy more assets. That's why it's rule number one. It's a very simple observation. It's the most fundamental of the rule sets. Rule number one: own more assets. Why? Because the wealthy own assets. So I need to figure out what assets are good to own. And it just so happens that I have rules that tell me whether assets are good to own and when to buy them. Rule number two: don't buy expensive assets. Buy them hopefully at the cheapest price possible. That doesn't tell me what price. My rules are vague, just like IRS rules. They are designed to give you a framework. Own more assets. Rule number one. Two, rule number two: at the cheapest price possible. Do you get the cheapest price possible? Probably not. You do the best you can. Rule number three: the attribute of the asset. Make sure it pays you. Because if it's paying you now and it's immutable and deterministic, it will pay you into the future. And rule number four is important for now: is don't fuck up the cash position. Because if you're buying a bunch of assets and you're forced to sell them because you need capital, probably didn't respect rule number four: don't mess up the cash position. Can't spend all your money. It's what a, actually that works whether it's investing or not, whether you just a bank account and a checking account, a savings account, and you're just balancing your budget. Can't mess up the cash. Can't spend all your money. Can't spend it all. Spend less than you make. So hopefully that helps, folks. Good stuff, Dean. Always. Morning, Cab. Joel in the house. Much pleasure. Asun, hello. Always good to see you. Good morning, Cab. Catching the stream live. Peter is here. Hello, Leandro. Going through my transactions from the last 2 years. Tell me I was wrong. Now everything has changed and my structure will materialize in the next 12 months. My expectation is something similar. This is exactly what we see in this Bitcoin chart. This circle right here, and I will denote that by a new color. The orange circle for Bitcoin is very different than the orange circle here. These are two very different circles. The circumstances in the global economic system are completely opposite in these two circles. This was a contracting liquidity environment. This is an expanding liquidity environment. There is nothing more that you need to know. Follow the rules and you'll be just fine. For instance, if this was a contracting liquidity environment now, what you would be doing is protecting rule number four to prevent you from needing to sell assets. And you would be stacking cash such that you could execute rule number one, respecting rule number two. You would be able to own. So, for instance, you'd have a 200 SMA mean regression. All right, great. If you're stacking cash from your cash flow, you'll be able to buy assets at the best price possible, a cheaper price, which is not necessarily the best price. Not necessarily, no one buys the bottom. I mean, some people do. That's pure luck. But the point is, you're getting them things at a cheaper price. So you're respecting rule number two, executing rule number one, um, and just making sure you're not messing up rule number 4. Anywho, do you have this financial exam ready? I'm curious to see it. No, no, I got a long time. My kids are young. I but it's primarily where I'm at with that is obviously early, but you got to understand the rules. It's like I, I have friends and family that are 18, 19, 20, and they've all fucked it up. They all get a paycheck and they spend all their money and they live beyond their means. And 20-year-olds in the family don't live at home. And I'm like, the mentality's all wrong. It's just wrong. And it's not the way for parents to treat kids or kids to treat parents. Um, I'm a big fan of extended family. I'm a big fan of family living together under all circumstances. I mean, obviously, things get weird if you're married or you're dating, and then it gets weird. Uh, so I understand that both as remembering when I was a kid, but also now being a parent. There comes a time when it's appropriate, but you can't fuck up the financial component. What's the point of fucking up your future just because it's a little bit awkward at home with family? Isn't it make sense to be a little bit more accommodative and understanding and strategic and cooperative and just considerate and accepting and uh, just leeway and being gracious and humble and having gratitude, both as a parent and a kid, to achieve an optimal financial outcome instead of burying yourself and fucking up your future. I mean, you only got one shot. You only got one shot. So either you're in a position where you get it right from the get go, which is almost no kids, or you're pulling back and you're reining things in and you're making corrections and fixing things, which is cool, which is probably the vast majority of people. It's the same thing with regard to like health and wellness. Most people fuck that up when they're in their youth. And then you get to your late 30s and your 40s and you're like, fuck, I got to change things around. And like I've changed things around a little bit and I feel like $1 million nowadays. I'm in the best shape of my life. And I wish I did things differently, but I didn't. But I was able to course correct. I got lucky in my late 20s. I was in my late 20s. I had this dysfunctional family. I stayed at home with my parents. I didn't really think about these things. I didn't have these rules in mind, but I stayed with my family for a long time. I didn't move out until I was 30. I worked through college and post college. I had an electrical engineering degree and I did pizza delivery after college and I did tech support at a credit card company. And then I got my first job. I moved out during my first job in software engineering. This was back in 2010, I guess. Yeah, no, give or take, whatever. The timeline doesn't matter. The point is, doing pizza delivery and tech support at a credit card company, I managed to save up living at home about $110,000. And this was after like 4 years. So I saved about 25 grand a year. So if I was making like 40 grand a year at the credit card company, I was making a lot of money doing pizza delivery. It was a relatively affluent neighborhood. So I was making like $35,000 a year doing pizza delivery. But I stayed at home. And obviously, my relationship with my parents, I didn't pay much rent. I paid for my car, cell phone, put food in the refrigerator, and took care of all those miscellaneous expenses. Probably spent about $10,000, $15,000 a year, but I was able to bank about 15, 20 grand a year. And point is, after about 5 years after college, 4 or 5 years, I had about that 110 grand sitting at home. Now, I can't explain to you why or how I did that. My wife always reminds me no one does what I've done, and I can't explain to you. Maybe was I healthy or not mentally? I don't know, but that's what I did, and I didn't spend that money, and it was just sat. And obviously, from my perspective now, was it probably stupid to have that sitting in a checking account? I don't know. Should I have invested it? 2010, if I started stacking that kind of money, probably would have been better invested. So I probably messed that one up. But I bought an apartment, and me and my wife moved out. And then 6 months later, a year later, we had our first daughter. Anyway, that's 5 minutes of my history. My wife always says, no one does what I did. And I don't know. I don't mean that from a, puffing my chest type of perspective. It's the only way I knew how to do it. It's what I did. So I encourage other people to do that too because it worked out well. Stay at home with your fucking parents. Now, if your parents are a bunch of assholes, then it's hard. And I'm sorry. That's the roommate path. You live in two, three people in a two-bedroom apartment, and you're making it work, and you're hustling to do the Charlie Munger, where $100,000 is the hardest goddamn thing you'll ever do in your entire life. Rest in peace, Charlie. He didn't understand crypto, nor does Buffett, but they sure as hell understood finances and how hard it was to get started. It wasn't easy for me, ladies and gentlemen. My 30s were filled with economic stress, and my stomach was churning, and this paycheck to paycheck in my 30s, until I got to the top of my pay scale as a software engineer in New York City. It was about making $180,000 a year working at the Huffington Post, an AOL subsidiary. Yeah, AOL. They own a lot of shit. Still do. And they were bought by, was it Verizon and the whole Oath thing and Yahoo and stuff like that. It was a whole interesting period of time. And then I couldn't get any more. So it was more or less paycheck to paycheck at the 180 in New York, and had a $3,500 a month mortgage, and you had all that insurance. Then you had not only just federal tax, you had New York City tax. So you absolutely just clobbered everywhere, left and right, because I worked in the city, and they just took all the money. There's no savings. There's nothing. I was just emotionally drained in my 30s. It's like it was impossible to get $200,000 a year in New York, and that's as a software engineer at the top of my game back then. Top of my game still to this day, maybe better than ever. Um, so I was just it's very, I wasn't always calm, cool, and collected like I am now. This was some time ago, and then I escaped New York. Just like John Carpenter, escaped from New York, and I made my way to Orlando, and I worked at Universal Studios for a year. It was the best job I ever had because I would sit in front of Jimmy Fallon for lunch for like an hour because I was so far ahead of my coworkers. They were working on iOS. There were multiple people working on iOS, and I'm working on Android, and I'm like 2 months ahead of them because I was the kind of software engineer I was and still am. So I had all this time. So I would just walk through the parks, and that was obviously Universal and Islands of Adventure. We would go into Islands of Adventure at times and go on some rides. And there's the Starbucks over there. And but City Walk was great. I love that. That was my favorite job. I lived in this apartment across from SeaWorld. Sea Isle was it called? Maybe they had a nice pool. I think it was $1,300, $1,400 a month rent for this one bedroom. And that was a lot of money back then. That was a lot of money when I worked at back then. And man, um, anywho, just a couple of nostalgic thoughts. Thank you for listening. Can we get this exam as well? I don't have an exam, but this is what I that you can't your kids. Me as a parent, my kids cannot move out without me knowing that they have a good mindset and they're ready and they're prepared and they have a plan. I mean, come on. We either do things in life or we do them right or we just wing it. And what's the point of winging it? Do things as good as you can. You have one shot to be the best you can, one shot to do things the best you can and do things right. So everyone should really do that. And I only wish the best for everyone and their children, and I expect the best for myself and my children. Happy Friday, Cap. Hope all is well. Much a pleasure, Brian. Always a pleasure. Our Discord chat was interesting regarding portfolio management, consolidation versus spec bets. Listen, it's a very simple equation, and I've landed where my portfolio structure is okay. I have one outsized portfolio position. I have I've had two relatively large portfolio positions, and for a while that was Velodrome and Aerodrome, and they're all going to consolidate into one, and that is going to be what it's going to be. And my outsized exposure is to Curve, and then I have still remaining minor exposure, and those are your 1, 2, 3% to 10% changes everything. That was a phrase we've used for a long time. So I'm not interested, ladies and gentlemen, in making the most money possible. I'm here to make the most sustainable amount of money as reasonably as possible. And that comes back to the whole pizza shop mentality and cash flow and optimizing accounting such that the government can't steal 30 to 50% of your money and reach into your pocket and just take bills out. So I want to optimize and I want to do well. I have no interest in trying to outperform everyone else and win and be ultra rich and drive an AMG 1. No, that car's crazy, by the way. I have no interest. I do have interest, but it's not a goal. It's not what I want to achieve. If it happens, it happens. I'm not going to complain about that. But it's not my expectation. I set my expectation so low that I'm going to achieve something, and it's going to be reasonable, reasonable expectations. We haven't been right in the right conditions for them to work out, or just the wrong bets. The spec bet with the spec bets, yes. Well, the spec bets, you don't know what's going to happen with the spec bets because the whole point of these allocations is what survives. And Curve survived, Velodrome, Aerodrome survived, and a lot of things have failed. And frankly, I think everything's still out with regard to Kingdom portfolio. I don't know if that is a surviving monetary policy. The emission schedule and the whole economics of their VE33 implementation clearly solidly didn't survive. That's a disaster. It's a ghost town. I mean, look at Curve. Curve's just growing and growing and growing. Just a $1 billion credit line to yield basis. I mean, come on. That's literally like not just surviving, that's thriving. Wild what's going on with CRV USD. Astounding. So, and there's the rationale why it's the outsized allocation. And that allocation for myself was chosen probably around the time of CRV USD. It was the outsized exposure because of what they were building. And quite content with the current structure. And the current portfolio structure has been the same thing. It's been for some years at this point. Just been a little bit of trimming over the last couple of months, last year. Just some trimming, some exposure. I'm looking forward to Nirvana and Samsara. That's coming next month in about a month from now, I think. We'll see what goes on there. Because I think Solana will get dragged along with Base because of the bridge, and should be interesting. Optimistic Superchain is going to get dragged along with Base. I don't know what's going to happen with Arbitrum and Orbits because that is just ghost town in my opinion. And Hyperliquid, who I just don't give a shit. I could care less about perpetual exchanges. Who seriously, who gives a shit? I don't give a shit about people gambling. I want people that are borrowing money for legitimate purposes. I want people that are actually doing business with borrowed capital, not just fucking gambling. Who gives a shit about gambling? That's my opinion. I want someone that takes $10 million worth of Bitcoin, borrows $1 million, and starts a business, an actual business, like a fucking pizza shop or a convenience store or something actually that matters, because that's the future of these businesses, of these crypto businesses. With further regression of Bitcoin mean a rally for alts, I feel like so many of them are at a discount, but they keep falling. I'm mostly in comp and FET, and my Dollarized losses just keep growing. What is comp? As in compound finance? And FET, I don't know what FET is. Um, I don't have answers for what are good allocations. Uh, Listen, ask yourself very simple question. Are they infrastructure? Are they part of the five businesses? As in foreign exchange, credit, derivatives, liquidity financing, and liability printing. And are their business, is their execution of that business growing? Because frankly, in my opinion, compound finance is kind of dead. Nobody talks about it at all. So just be careful with that, in my opinion. And that's my opinion. It doesn't mean it's necessarily the right opinion. Like, I just don't see any activity or anything about it that's interesting at all. I mean, just use Aave. Isn't that the hot narrative? And wasn't Compound always comparable to Aave? And Aave is firing on all cylinders. I mean, Aave is literally the 46th largest bank in the United States by deposits. So that's crazy. I mean, I hope that doesn't, I'm not talking bad about investments or investment choices, but if you're comparing Aave to like a compound, uh, it's a no-brainer. Just as Mark Zeller says, just use Aave. My 2 cents. Um, Dollarized losses. Well, do you need the money? So if you need the money, make sure rule number 4 is respected. So make sure you have cash to see if these investments play out, and make sure that you have other investments other than that, that are infrastructure that are really established. Like, what else is established at this point? Is, I mean, maybe Uniswap. I don't like it. I don't. I know Crypto Condom really likes the trade. Maybe the fee switch turns on. I know. I personally subscribe to what you know Aerodrome says about Uniswap. I agree with that sentiment. I think I think Aerodrome falls in line with Base perfectly, and Coinbase for that matter. And I think Curve is just the financial infrastructure that everyone needs, that they don't even know that they need it. Um, but look, what could I say? My dollarized losses keep piling up as well. But I have rule number 4, and I stacked up some cash that I am going through. I'm spending my cash, so I don't have to sell assets. I hope that helps. I don't have answers. I just have stories. Lone Tree, I started following you in DeFi Summer. Can't believe how much has happened since then. Happy to see you're still here and educating new folks. Great stuff, Cap. Oh, DeFi Summer 2020. Was it 2020 or? Yeah. Oh my God. Was that really 5.5 years ago? I feel so old. Definitely have more gray hairs nowadays. Well, welcome. Always a pleasure. Obviously, our story has changed a little bit since then, but still, hopefully it's rational. Definitely more coherent nowadays. Peter, working on upskilling as of now, adding another 20 to 30K a year. My earnings, by a paycheck type mentality, cash flow. Rule number 3, fuck you, pay me. I love to hear it. And growing my affiliate marketing business, lovely. High paying skills, cash flow businesses are the cheat code plus tax strategy. That's it. Cash flow, tax strategy. Cash flow, tax strategy. And that's it. That changes the equation. Well done, Peter. I realized I wanted more assets than I had. I need more dollars to buy that assets, hence upskilling. That's right. Grab a skill, pick a skill, and execute. And if it doesn't work, do something else. There's always something else. Always something else. I find it interesting and funny. Crypto Twitter wants to sell their assets at the exact time the stars are aligned for big capital. They lack patience and a strategy, it seems. Well, they also look to others for answers. Most people don't have a capacity to answer their own questions or do their own due diligence, and they that's why people look for leaders. That's why there's always a leader in hierarchy, military, politics, even in business. There's always the leader, the corporate ladder. That's how humans are structured. The vast majority follow, a few lead. Alphas and betas. The vast majority always get it wrong. They will sell the assets at the wrong time. Meanwhile, everything that we understand about finance says you don't sell assets, you own more. And you rule number one the shit out of everything. Own more assets. That's what the wealthy tell us. They literally tell us just own more assets. And literally, the news media reminds us of that all the time. It's like, oh, the 90%, uh, 1% of the population owns 95% of everything. All right, own more assets over time. So that's half this stream was about young folks and not fucking up their budgets. I tell cousins and family, take 10 years, and you make it 50 grand a year. You're able to carve out 20 grand a year for investments because you just took on two roommates and you cut your $3,000 a month rent down to 1,000. There's your $24,000 a year. If you have a $3,000 a month rent, you take on two roommates, and it gets awkward and it gets weird, but you just freed up $2,000 a month. You got 24 grand that you can invest per year. Come on. I know it sounds simple, but it really is as simple as it sounds. It's just outside of most people's horizon, but it's real right there. That's what folks can do. Can you share your opinion about DTCC plans and tokenized stocks? There's nothing super interesting about that. It's more just headline buzz. DTCC, Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, they handle treasury liquidity and treasury transactions. That was a big thing that Gensler was talking about. Like, oh, Gensler said, why is everyone not talking about this? It's massive. So basically, if everything needs to be settled, all treasury transactions on the planet need to be settled through the DTCC. That means they control and manage liquidity conditions. So if all of a sudden, you know, Japan wants to sell their like a trill worth or whatever the hell they have left, DTCC could come in and slow down liquidations or say you just freeze the market, and that may cause complexity, but they have a capacity to, I would imagine, slow things down, speed things up, or manage liquidity conditions. So central clearing, that's the terminology or the phrase or the concept that the government created over the last, I don't know, 2, 3 years. Centralized clearing of all US government treasuries. That means centralized control over liquidity. My man. Truth Seeker, last question. We'll wrap it up for the day. Thoughts on the use case of crypto neobanks built on stablecoin infra? For example, Avicii feels like you described its use case, trustless, immutable logic, and finance. Well, that's what CRVUSD is. That's what Go is from Aave. That's what Bold is from Liquidity. These are neobanks. And what is the most interesting one to me? Frankly, there's only two interesting stablecoins to me that remain, and that's because they have the right tech. Now, one has the right tech, and it's also shown it's not the best investment. That's Frax, because they have the AMOs and they dominate liquidity on the Frax stablecoin. Frax has never had any issues because they understand what's required for a stablecoin. And the only other one that's growing monumentally is CRBUSD because they have the peg keepers, which is basically Frax's AMO infrastructure. They manage liquidity proactively via interest rates and via peg keepers. You're not going, CRVUSD will not be over $1. That peg is topside control. Those peg keepers have a capacity to control topside peg. And downside peg is controlled likewise by the peg keepers as well as interest rates. And Michael's talking about improving interest rate dynamics. So it's just going to get better. It's just going to get better. What a hell of a dollar product. So these are the neobanks and frankly, Aave. So Aave and Go's fine. Go's cool because it's an Aave product, but from a banking standpoint, it's more of a money market because they're not really CRBUSD and Frax are dollar liabilities, whereas Aave is taking in collateral and lending other assets that people are providing to be lent. So it's a money market. It's a bank though. It's a bank, and we're staring at it. It's the 46th largest bank in the United States by deposit. So I, in my opinion, you have what's the appropriate amount of diversification for um, uh, the small plays, as Arrow was talking about earlier. So I'd say you have your primary outsized allocation, your big bet. Then you have maybe one or two large size bets, and then you have your Hail Marys, your punts. All right, two, three punts, 1, 2, 3% of the portfolio. Okay, 3% of the portfolio evaporates overnight. All right, what are you gonna do? You'll survive. So something to consider. Um, but see, the irony is the young folks that think crypto from 2020 is like old. What they don't see is that it's brand new, and the stuff that's old and has survived, it's big stuff. It's huge because it survived, and that's all you need to do is survive. So what has survived? What survived 22? I mean, 22 was a massive liquidity collapse. FTX, Celsius, uh, what have you? All those big boys that imploded. Oh my God. If it survived that, it could survive a lot. And that means everything. To really understand where we're heading, you got to understand pre 2020. And that's something I've talked about a lot on the stream. 2019, what was it like? And I'm not going to do that now because we've talked about that, and this is the end of the stream. But to understand where we are, to appreciate where we are right now, you really needed to be there in 2019, and you needed to understand what the hell was going on in 16 and 17, and you needed to feel the pain of 2018, and you needed to see what the goddamn Fed did in September of 2019 when they bailed out the United States banking system in September of 2019, when the United States banking system completely failed. I'm saying 2019, this isn't 2020. This isn't the COVID. This is pre-COVID. This is September of 2019 when the United States banking system failed. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So there's a bit of a different story than what general public thinks. And that is always going to be the case. Friday, December 12th, 12:33 p.m. Thank you all for joining me today. 226 people made it to the end of the stream and are now all that much more rational because of it. I wish you all a good one. It's a Friday. It's almost the end of the year. Keep it calm, keep it rational. 4 rules, 5 businesses. This is the place to be. I will see you guys and gals next week. Until then, peace.